This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/JavaScript Jabber.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from the magic of a full bottle of Tylenol.
Nice. Aimee Knight.
Hello from Nashville.
I'm Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that is Kitson Kelly. You want to say hi?
Hello, coming from Australia in the morning, so everybody else is in the evening, and I'm stuck here with my coffee.
Whew, I think it's pretty early there, isn't it?
Yeah, 7:30, yeah.
Oh, so not terrible, but early. Now, I think last time I talked to you, you were somewhere in the Midwest?
I was in London last time.
Oh, okay.
I get around. Oh, yeah, no, London last time, yeah.
So we read this article on the SitePen blog. And before the show, you mentioned you're no longer with SitePen, due mainly to your move to Australia. But you want to just kind of give us an update on where you're at now and what you're doing, and then we'll dive into this article?
Yeah, so I relocated to Australia and I joined ThoughtWorks, which has a presence all over the globe. But they were looking for folks in Australia, and I wanted to be in Australia, and so I joined and am a principal technologist and working with folks in Australia trying to figure out their strategies from a technology perspective.
Right. So anyway, you wrote a couple of articles about choosing web frameworks, and I thought it was kind of interesting just from the some of the ideas that you put in here. One of them was if we chose our JavaScript framework like we chose our music, which I think most people listen to a mix of what their parents listen to and what their friends listen to. That's what came to mind on that one. And then we also have just web frameworks conclusions. And so I'm curious, when we start talking about JavaScript frameworks, where do you tend to start?
Well, I think that was the question that sort of, particularly SitePen, sort of focused on front-end development. That was the perennial question. It usually wasn't what should we choose. It was usually, I want to use this or this, which one should I use? And between Dylan and myself got kind of tired of answering that question because it was never a sort of elevator sort of question that you could answer like, oh, well, yeah, this, because there's a million questions that you'd have to answer. And I think the thing that we wanted to challenge was oftentimes people trivialize that decision and go, oh, because they read a blog post somewhere that React is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or Angular is developed by Google, so that we should do what Google does, and they would often take one aspect of choosing a JavaScript framework, and we sort of always have said, well, it depends, right? There's a reason why there are lots of frameworks and there's a lot of churn, is because people's needs and teams' needs evolve over a period of time. So what we wanted to do was really explore it. So the one about choosing your music is the start of a series of 11 posts, which concludes with the conclusions. And of course, everybody sort of jumps to the end and reads the end chapter. And that was the one that caused the most controversy, because it was, people had their religions from a JavaScript framework perspective, and we're like, oh, you didn't consider this. We got a lot of well, this framework is better than all these other ones that you reviewed. And it was like, well, that's not the point. What we tried to do was take 6 of the popular ones and really challenge how you needed to look at the breadth of them and give people information that kind of hopefully raise more questions about it. But all the fights were about the last article.
I was really surprised to see that you included 6 of them, because everybody kind of just is usually Vue, Angular, React, but you included Dojo 2, which we talked about before, and then you also included Ember, and what was the other one?
Aurelia.
Aurelia. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So I was really shocked that you guys did all 6. Have you? Hopefully, I'm not jumping ahead, but I'm kind of curious, because I know you guys do consulting. Have you guys actually recommended one of the 3 less popular ones to people? And if so, why?
I mean, obviously, because we were developing, Dojo 2, we've used Dojo 2 at a number of customer sites, mostly because it meets our specific needs really well. So, especially in situations where we were leading the development, we've been actively using Dojo 2. Where there's a larger team, we look at it. I mean, admittedly, we haven't recommended Aurelia to anybody. And Ember, in a lot of cases, you find that there's an established ecosystem.
Yep. If they're React or Ruby on Rails shop probably or something.
Yeah. And we haven't necessarily challenged that. It's that's a lot of people have this sort of pressure put upon them of it's the fear of missing out. If you're not using React immediately, then you're making a mistake. So why don't you rewrite all of your applications in React, right? So I think even in a lot of cases, which some of the comments were in there of, well, there's a lot of people that use jQuery still, and it's yes, and that's valid, and there's a lot of people that use Dojo 1 still, and that's valid too. But a lot of it was, how do you make that decision? And in most cases, it's never definitive. I mean, I think, Aimee, you were saying earlier that it tends to be a very collaborative process that you have to go through, and sort of not one size fits all.
Definitely.
So
I guess
which one is the best?
What is the best? Yeah, and I mean, we kept that would be the one that we get drawn on a lot. Well, okay, so what is the best one? I mean, I think of the major ones, Angular. I mean, and this is a lot of personal opinion that gets injected in here. Angular, a lot of people grabbed it, and I think it trades far more on who is behind it than it does on its merits. And particularly with Angular.js, we saw a lot of situations that sort of promoted what we would call anti-patterns, particularly about the way dependencies are injected is something that we're not a big fan of. Angular made it easy to develop single page applications, but it was really came out of people who were very comfortable with a very view centric view of the world, and a very almost drag and drop view of the world. And so we think, the feeling is Angular oftentimes it works really well. But if you're trying to really align your front end to how you consume back-end services and that sort of thing, you can often get a challenge and a disconnect in maintainability long term. But Angular is really popular. There's a huge amount of skill set available in the marketplace, and you can get some really solid applications out of it. If we weren't doing Dojo 2, I think invariably we'd probably be in the React Redux camp for the most part, because React and Redux are the patterns that we like to see. We really like the reactive architecture. We think that that's a really long-term maintainable way. The biggest challenge with React is it requires a lot of skill. You need really smart people early on to make decisions, because it's quite easy to create applications that are unmaintainable because it's so flexible. I mean, React and Redux are nothing but tool sets versus a framework. I think they're tools that help you build applications, but there's about 1 million decisions you have to make. How are you going to manage your CSS? How are you going to, your build pipeline? All of that is all really super flexible. And with flexibility comes a lot of danger. If you don't have the right sort of process to start, you could end up with, if you're an enterprise that has 20 different React projects going on, you could easily have 20 different applications that if somebody went from one team to the other, they wouldn't have any idea how to work or maintain. So you have to establish a lot of convention, which unlike Angular, you could probably drop somebody in an Angular app and they'd probably be able to figure their way around.
So I kind of have another question too that I was going to ask that, I don't know, it just kind of dawned on me today. So I've heard like people say, especially people, we were talking about this at NG Atlanta that I was just at last week, that typically you see like startups going the React route and maybe more like established companies going the Angular route. But I also was really curious if you think that like certain domains or like certain problem sets would lend themselves better to a certain framework. And I know we on this podcast have had this discussion a million different ways. So this is just maybe like a new question that I hadn't thought of before. I'm guessing the answer is no, but I don't know.
No, I think yes, right. But that's one point of it. I think different problems, different domains. I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we have so many JavaScript frameworks, because they scratch different itches in different ways. So I think you're absolutely right, Aimee, that there's probably different domains of problems. But that's one aspect of it is, what type of application you're building. And one of the articles we earlier in the series, we actually touch on, are you building a mobile first app? Are you building a consumer facing website? Are you building a sort of enterprise back office application? And those were kind of our three main use cases. And each of the frameworks has strengths in different ways around that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like React was like born out of a specific problem in their domain. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, that's the challenge, I think, with some of the frameworks too, is they're often built to fix a particular problem. And React was Facebook's problem of creating components on a web page, and the Redux sort of came later because it was a different pattern. And this is the challenge that we have in JavaScript as a whole, is the amount of churn that goes and the popularity that ebbs and flows, because it's 2 years ago it would have been React plus I forgot what it was called, but Redux came along and Dan Abramov wasn't part of Facebook at the time. It became really popular and became the pattern, and then you see that the previous pattern is like, okay, that's no longer good. I mean, people commented on the article. It's like, oh, well, a lot of people still use Backbone. Yeah, you're right. A lot of people still use Backbone. And there's things that, in jQuery, things we don't talk about anymore that, a few years ago, if you didn't have them on your resume, you weren't considered a good developer.
That makes sense. I'm kind of curious, you talk about, okay, well, we'd probably wind up doing React, but, Aimee asked the question, are there certain problem domains that apply? And your answer is mostly yes. So given that it may matter what I'm doing, in fact, it probably matters what I'm trying to do, how do I go about evaluating this, right? How do I go through the process that you went through in these articles to say, okay, this is the framework that we're going to go with, and here are the solid or valid reasons why?
And my advice would be to, start at that beginning. And I think why it's 11 points, we wanted to cover the gamut of everything that was that we kind of considered valid considerations, right? From how you create UI elements, how you manage a user experience end to end with your design teams, what the community is like as far as, when you need help, are you going to be able to get it? Because, it isn't, frameworks aren't for Christmas, they're for life in a lot of cases, or at least a couple of years. So you become dependent upon the community that supports it, and accessibility, how easy it is to get to training. And then you may have specific domain considerations, like, how do you address accessibility? You may, hopefully everybody addresses accessibility, but they all take a different approach to that. How much do you want out of the box components that you just drop into your application versus, how much your requirements are to really develop things, and you're very opinionated from how your UX is going to be. So I think if start at the beginning of the article series, and we think the areas is go through, and even if you're not choosing one of the 6 frameworks, or you don't even share the opinion that we have of the 6 frameworks, I think it's a really good way to step through that and see if you can answer those questions yourself and say, okay, we understand the reasons why we did it. So I think in a lot of ways, from a SitePen perspective, we kind of gave away our secret sauce of how we sort of evaluate frameworks. But at the same time, if it's to collect that information and have experts that kind of know the wide range of what the options are, then, SitePen is a good organization to help you step through that process.
So here's a sidestepping question. When is it important just to get to work, no matter what the framework is? And when is it important to figure out if a framework is right first?
Yeah, I think that's one of those challenges. Is usually a answer is better than no answer. And oftentimes, I think we spend a lot of time debating what the best answer is, when in fact you've got a customer or a project deadline, and getting something is better than nothing. I mean, I think that's they're all built on JavaScript. I think a lot of it, the thing that I've given advice to, especially individuals who are trying to choose something, or even, if it's a single team, the best thing to do is choose 3 or 4 frameworks, do a technical spike. If you can't get an app working in sort of half a day, then it's probably not the right framework for you, right? You should, and narrow that list down fairly quickly. If you're a larger thing, you could spend a week, maybe 2 weeks, figuring things out and making sure that you're kicking things off in the right way. But if you're in endless sort of pseudo-religious debates about what the best thing to do is, you're probably wasting your time.
Is it ever appropriate to not even use a framework, or to back off and use? I don't know if I really even think of jQuery as a framework as much as just a utility. I guess it kind of straddles the line. But anyway, is it ever appropriate to go back to just some tried and true technology that's really old, or nothing at all, and just JavaScript it from scratch?
Yeah, I think for the functionality of the language, right, JavaScript has radically moved over the last few years. The challenge, and we talk about it in the conclusions article, that the challenge becomes, how comfortable are you in the long term sort of shimmying over the lumpiness that we still find in the browser world, right? For a lot of organizations, supporting at least IE 11 historically is still a requirement, and you've got to sort of assess what your ability and your desire. It's like every year now, TC39 delivers us new functionality in JavaScript, but you also have the DOM and the browser behavior and CSS that or other two technologies that you have to sort of manage. So there's definitely been a movement to do the vanilla JavaScript sort of thing. I think in a lot of cases that can still be really intimidating, right? How do I structure an application? How do I provide consistency? And if the team or the group of people you're working with have a clear opinion about how to do that, then I think it's good to go frameworkless. But if you need something to help you guide you to a pattern that is reusable, that you might be able to maintain over the long term, and or as a company organization you want to have a common language of what skill sets you need to go out there, it can be really challenging to say, I just know JavaScript, because it's JavaScript and CSS and and how you develop applications. It's far easier to sort of boil that down to, do you know React, right? Or do you know Angular? And so that's where the spectrum is there. I think for enterprise development, large scale team development, you probably should use something that you feel is going to be there tomorrow as far as a framework, because it's going to be far easier to structure your applications in a way. If you're doing work on your own, use the tools that you're most comfortable with, be it jQuery, be it Vanilla.js, be it Bootstrap, be it React and Redux, right? Whatever works for you is probably better than feeling like if you don't have Angular on your resume that you're gonna not be a good web developer.
So you just said something. You want to pick something that will, quote, be there tomorrow. And I have two questions about this. One, isn't everything going to be there tomorrow? It's all open source. Even if they remove the organization from GitHub, it's going to be mirrored somewhere. And two, what does that mean, or what does that matter? Like, if I build my application, I'm done.
And that's truly, if you're done, and there isn't a long-term maintainability concern. I mean, especially in enterprise, we see a situation where these things evolve, over a long period of time, and they have lifetimes. Business backend office business applications that have a lifetime of 10, 15 years in some cases, right? And they can't be rewritten every year when the latest and greatest comes out, right? So there's that part of it is what you're doing. If you're creating a consumer-facing web application, that's a mobile application that is a point in time, and if it gets changed out tomorrow for something else, who cares, right? Then that maintainability concern becomes less. The tomorrow is that's the challenge, right? The browsers are going to kind of evolve. If the underlying framework, if you're expecting it to continue to evolve as the web evolves, then you have to be a little bit more careful, because you're right, you're right, it's open source code. But if the community moves on, and this was one of the things that kind of got debatable in the conclusions article, is we said you need to consider, particularly with Vue.js and Aurelia, that from the code development perspective, they appear to be very contingent upon one individual. And if that individual were to stop maintaining it, the framework would, in our opinion, stop evolving. And a lot of the rest of the community of both Vue.js and Aurelia said, well, that's not true. It's a really active community. And the challenge was we were measuring that based on what we saw as committed code in the repos. And I think there's still a risk there that you need to look at that, right? If you're fine it not being maintained tomorrow, then it's fine to choose it. If you're expecting that it to be maintained and there be an upgrade path, which is like one of the strengths that Ember has had, is they continue to give you the guidelines of how to keep your application upgradable over multiple versions of Ember, right? Which is probably more important for enterprise development, where the team members change out over years, and you want something that you can maintain over a long period of time. But that isn't always a consideration for everything, which is why context matters so much in these decisions.
This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI.
So looking at these frameworks and, where things have gone and where they're going, I'm curious, where are we going to wind up over the next few years? Because things have somewhat stabilized around kind of the big three frameworks. So, do we just kind of see movement between the three, or do you think there's going to be something else, that's kind of the next evolution in frameworks beyond just, we're doing components these days?
Yeah, I think the thing that's so fragmented at the moment still is the tooling, right? We went from a situation where years ago you needed a functional library like jQuery to give you at least a base level of usability with the APIs that we had available for the web. And tooling wasn't really a consideration. You basically put your code up on a server and it downloaded to the browser, and web applications were a bit simpler then, and things like code splitting and bundling and all of that weren't huge considerations. You fast forward now, and the tooling, the build pipeline, we've gotten a level of maturity in the language that has moved it towards a more traditional type of language where I don't think there's any real serious projects where all you do is hit F5 in your browser to refresh it, right? In a lot of cases, you're using things like Webpack and Rollup and tooling like that to create your bundles and do your code splitting and all of that sort of thing. But the problem is it's still very fragmented. It's still in a lot of cases very much DIY. I think that's where the big challenge. We should see a step in evolution over that, and maybe even a level of standards around how we do tooling. Module loading, I could talk forever about the state of ES modules and how that's still fragmented and unclear how we're ever going to get to a situation where we can figure out how to load a module into a browser in an efficient manner. And so there's bits where the standards need to continue to evolve. So I think it'll be less about the front end, how you build a component, and more about how we actually create that pipeline from how I author code as a developer to it being something that is performant and manageable in the browser. Yeah, and we may very well see things around how things like React were specifically designed to work around perceived performance challenges around creating components in the browser. But at the same time, we've now finally got the sort of standards around web components, and they're actually in all the greenfield browsers. We can now create rich components without doing things like abstracting ourselves from a virtual DOM. So there will always be churn. I think if you go back 6 years ago and somebody would have said, jQuery, we're going to be using jQuery for the next 10 years. They obviously, it's the Bill Gates, you only need 64K. So there will be changes, and I'm not going to predict it.
Well, I would say that jQuery is probably the most boring in the best way possible tool. It's been around, it's staying around. It's probably not going anywhere except down in code size as the additions to the DOM spec make less code necessary in it.
Yes, and I mean, that's probably a consideration if you're looking for something longevity wise. Is how are they going to hollow it out as the standards evolve?
So I was going to diverge on the framework discussion and see, are there any things as far as tooling that you recommend for teams? Because I know based on conversations I've had with some Sitefin people that you guys are really enjoy using TypeScript. So, and I know from what I've played with it, I really like it too. But other than that, are there other tools you recommend, and what kind of considerations should teams have for tooling?
Yeah, I'm a huge TypeScript fan, a huge, and I was really resistant to it to begin with. And I almost don't see it as a tool, as I see it as a well, I guess it is a tool. But yeah, I would, even if you're not using a framework that's built in TypeScript, TypeScript, especially when you're in large enterprise teams, is a great way of ensuring that the code you author is going to behave the way that you think it's going to behave. And it's been a huge step change in there. So yeah, I can go on and on about TypeScript, but I think from a tooling perspective, I was really sort of resistant to frustrated by Webpack a year ago. And it's because it's a hard, complex tool to understand. But it is probably the most powerful tool for creating bundles of JavaScript. And I think there's been a major step change in 3 and 4, and they've been really sort of resolving a lot of the challenges that were there with when you have a really powerful tool that's really difficult to understand. And build tooling's always been a challenging area for JavaScript. I think Webpack 4 and even Webpack 3 have improved things a huge amount. But again, Webpack is the Swiss Army knife of tools, which it means that you could almost make a career doing JavaScript build tooling itself because it is such a complex area. But you can, so big fans of Webpack. There are simpler things out there, like more focused things like Rollup. Rollup is a good thing, but Webpack seems to be the one that's becoming the almost industry standard. And with Sean Larkin making the move to Redmond and to Microsoft, and Microsoft having a focus on tooling as a whole, I think we'll probably only see greater things out of Webpack in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
CSS is a bit of a scattershot approach. I mean, in Dojo 2, we really wanted to focus on post CSS and focusing on authoring CSS in CSS modules and as future CSS Next, and transpile it back to stuff that's supported in browsers. I'm still a fan of post CSS, but obviously there's a valid set of tools between Sass and Less and a whole bunch of CSS processors out there that make CSS a lot more manageable. So there isn't a clear winner in that area in my mind. And then from a debug, I mean, one of the things that has made a huge difference from a testing perspective, even in the last sort of 4 or 5 months, has been Chrome releasing headless Chrome and it's sort of incorporating that, and Puppeteer, and being able to really test web applications with that, as you would test server code. And I still think we have a bit of an evolution and a bit of a road to go there. The other thing that has been a bit risky that I've been seeing is a lot of people, even frameworks, going, oh, well, all we do is test our code on headless Chrome. And we're kind of getting this monoculture of as long as I test on Chrome and it works, then it's going to work everywhere. And that's a fallacy, right? That's not the way the world works. That's not our consumers don't have Chrome, all of them.
Do you think there's a way that we could implement a framework that changes consumers? Like maybe Just you must load this module in your person before you use this module in your browser, and that requires a mentality shift that puts people into Chrome. Maybe we can just get rid of programming that way and like put modules in people that get done whatever the program was supposed to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, years ago, I worked in tech support for a large company that produces fruit computers, there were several times where I wish we could have, because we replaced the PCs a lot, and there were several times where I wanted to replace the user because that was actually the big problem. So yeah, if we could replace our users sometimes and upgrade them like we upgrade our frameworks, then that would actually help.
So one other thing that I wind up saying a lot to people, because they're like, well, there are all these frameworks, and which one do I pick? And one thing that I found is for like 80% of the cases, any of them will work fine. So yeah. I guess the other question I have is just, looking at these, some of them are, you evaluate them and it's going to be like, yeah, this fits better with what we're trying to accomplish. But sometimes it's just, an AJ picked out, sometimes it's better just to get to work. But, for the other 20% of the cases, do you just talk to other people who are doing what you're doing, or is there a way to really know if it's going to pay off or not before actually building your app? Because I find that a lot of times what I learned while trying to build whatever it is I'm building, that's where it's like, oh, you know what? I built this one in Angular, I built this other one in React, and I should have built the first one in React.
Yeah, I think part of it is and this is more of a team, a mentality too, is you need to build and plan to throw away stuff, right? Because let's say even if you choose React and Redux, and I see this far more often with React and Redux, right, is that because there's so many decisions to be made, you'll write an app once and go, oh, and you learn a huge amount, and then what you need to do is throw it away, write it again, and go, okay, I learned a lot more then. Yeah, and then finally the third time you're like, oh, okay, now I know what I'm doing, right? And I think you have to plan for that, right? It is things are so complex, especially if you're going into a new framework, is you need to throw away code, right? And you need to not be worry and break out in a cold sweat because you're throwing away code. If there's one thing that we've improved over the last 10 years, is it's easy to, the easier it is to write code, the easier it is to throw away code. And throwing away code is actually one of the healthiest things that you can do, in my opinion. I look at stuff I wrote, a couple of years ago, and I still cringe.
That's really interesting. I remember working on a project. This was back, more Ruby, but still, we built an app with Rails, and we created a whole bunch of problems in it. So then we kind of went the other way, and we created a whole bunch of services, microservices with Sinatra. Turned out that going all the way that way didn't make sense either. So we rewrote it once, but there was a huge amount of resistance to rewriting it the third time. Even though we probably could have gotten it done a ton faster, we could have reused some of the code we had already written, and it would have made the maintainability of the app overall over the next several years much, much easier.
And I've seen that. I've personally experienced it, and I've seen that work a lot of times. Right? It's the third time seems to be the magic number, and I'd almost, if I were being brutally honest, I plan to write it 3 times, right? And you're right. I think it's that third time where you're kind of, and there's parts of it. This was very true on Dojo 2. There were parts of Dojo 2. It was the third time is the bit that actually has been working and has made it into it. We wrote it and threw it away and wrote it again and threw it away. And I know one of the big frustrations for Dylan is our grid component was always been a challenge with Dojo 2, and we made the decision to throw away version 2 of Dojo 2's grid, and and that was painful because there was a lot of work that went into it. But we knew that that was the right thing to do. But now we hadn't had the time to write version 3. So it seems like 3 is the magic number when it comes to throwing away code.
Yeah, well, I'm finding that with the UI too. I'm working on an app that helps podcasters manage their scheduling and sponsorships and stuff. And I have something that works, but I'm reworking a lot of it, and it just comes down to, oh, this isn't quite right. But it's something beyond just a simple tweak. And so I've been having to throw out and rearrange code. And I think a lot of times we just fail to give ourselves permission to do that.
Yep. Well, and then especially in enterprise development, then it's one of those things where I think the best thing to do is, one, as engineers, we have a hard time throwing away code because it's like, well, we put a lot of sweat into it. But management often is like, why are you throwing away, code that's good assets? And I think that's one of the things that we have to help enterprises understand, that is actually a healthy part of software development. If you're not throwing away code, then that means that you're carrying all that debt forward, right? And oftentimes the best thing to do is wipe it clean and start again.
So given all of the information you've put out there as far as choosing frameworks and making the right decisions, the thing that I wonder at this point is, let's say you're going into a completely greenfield project and you're starting to pull together things and make decisions. What are the first decisions you make? Is it the framework or is it something else? I mean, is this like the second, third, 10th, 90th decision you make? I mean, where does it fit?
I think in my mind is that, there are definitely a couple prerequisites that you should think about. Especially the modern sense of development from a team perspective. Know who your users are going to be, right? Understand what you actually need to deliver. And if it's internal users within an enterprise, understand what they are, what their pain points are. If it's consumers, make sure you really understand what you're trying to deliver. And then the next phase is how are you as a team, going to be structured, right? How opinionated are you going to be about the user experience? Is the user experience going to be the value proposition that you're delivering to your users? So you want something that you have really fine control over how you're going to create the user experience. And then on the other hand, if you're saying, actually, it's just we need form fields on there, it's a business application, we're not going to be overly concerned about the user experience from a look and feel perspective. We'd be fine with off-the-shelf components. Then that all of that sort of pre-work kind of feeds it. And then the third area is to be really brutally honest with your capabilities as a team. How good are you at JavaScript and CSS, or are you more of a functionality focused team, right? Where your skill sets are kind of, you need the sort of guide rails to help you through those technical challenges. And then I think you have the right information to begin to look at frameworks and to figure out which of those kind of fits you best. And then do experiments. If somebody on the team's going, oh, well, we'd be stupid not to use React, right? And you're not comparing that to something else, then you're probably making a mistake.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that we should recommend to folks trying to make these decisions before we get to our picks?
From my perspective, it's experiment and be honest with yourself and your team on what you're really capable of, and leave your religion at the door.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do some picks.
For you, the listeners of JavaScript Jabber, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
Aimee, do you have some picks for us?
I do. So one of them I actually just found this morning as I was surfing Hacker News, which I do pretty often. And I thought it was really pertinent because it reminded me of some questions that kind of arose when I did the boot camp. So I purposely went to a 6-month one because I thought that, not only do I'm not sure how much you can really cram into 10 to 12 weeks, but also I wondered, not just like the amount of information, but when you're learning that quickly, how much of it actually sticks. And so this was just on the NPR blog, and it was, would college students retain more if professors dialed back the pace? And so really, like, the article pretty much says yes. So that kind of proves what I was thinking as far as the boot camp. Obviously, it's different for different people. Anyway, so I'll post a link to that in the show notes. For my second pick, I'm going to pick something, I've had problems in the past where users of the applications that I'm working on, they actually want like a certain page printed out. And obviously you can provide like a separate style sheet for this, but that can be a little bit of a pain. So this is just a URL you can go to, put a URL in, and it's going to spit out a nicely formatted PDF of that URL. So that is my second pick. And then I'm going to do a third pick too, because I've been speaking on CSS a lot recently. And it was a Medium post that I saw recently. So for anybody who's like entering the ecosystem now, it just kind of gives a historical view of how, where CSS got started, and kind of like the pace and the different implementations and how things have changed in the last couple of years and where we are now. So that would be my third pick. And that is it for me.
All right, AJ, what are your picks?
Let me just unmute myself here. So I've got a great pick. Last week, this day, Tuesday, I went to sleep. But then that night, I woke up with a fever. And I stayed in bed pretty much until yesterday, for the most part, because I was like really stressed a couple weeks before with some stuff going on, and then I think my body just collapsed. And so, I popped some Advil to try to get the fever down, and that worked okay. And then I tried some naproxen, and then I, just played Ring Around the Rosies in the medicine cabinet with a couple different things trying to get these flu symptoms to go away. And I'm not a big medicine person, but I really needed something to make me feel like I'd be able to sleep so my body could rest. And eventually my wife picked up some Tylenol, cold and flu severe, and that it's just magic. It's just magic. You drink it 30 milliliters at a time, and you go to sleep, and then you wake up a couple days later rested and feeling great again. So I just recommend, if you are feeling the flu during this flu season, you go get yourself some Tylenol and you just chug that sucker down according to the directions and as your doctor recommends.
Nice. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. So I've been, like I said, I've been working on this app for podcasters. And I have to say that one of the best places that I've been able to go to just to get input on this stuff is Facebook. And so I think sometimes we all discount Facebook. I think most people in the tech community, at least that I talk to, prefer Twitter. But if you want feedback from people in a quick way, I've been finding Facebook to be really, really helpful. So I'm going to pick Facebook groups. And then I've been rereading a couple of books, mainly at the behest of my business coach. And one of them that I just really, really like and has made a difference for me is the 12-week year. So if you're looking at planning and goals and how to make all that work, I can't recommend highly enough the 12-week year. And if you have read it and you're looking for somebody to do the weekly accountability meetings with, I am looking for a group. So just keep that in mind. And then the last thing that I'm going to pick is kind of a recent discovery. I had a friend of mine recommend the Google Drive for Business, and I am totally digging that. I think part of it's just that I get a blank slate to, to put stuff in that hasn't kind of grown into this massive mess over the years like Dropbox has. But I'm really liking it. You basically get unlimited storage, and you can assign stuff and make it owned by teams instead of by you or by individuals. So I'm really digging that. So I'm going to pick Google Drive for Business. Now I'm using that with the Google Apps, or whatever they call it now, G Suite, I think it is. So if you're just on Gmail, I don't know how exactly that works, but for me, I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm going to pick that. Kitson, what are your picks?
Actually, partly due to my new role, everybody's talking about cloud, and so there was a little bit of making sure I was up to speed, and I had experimented from a personal perspective with AWS before and just found it really frustrating, and I thought, well, I need to get a better understanding of the other options out there, and again, I've fallen into the Microsoft. I used to loathe everything Microsoft, and now I find myself secretly becoming a fanboy. And so I tried Azure, and got a developer account on Azure, and was like, wow, this is actually usable. And got myself up to speed quite quickly with it. Wow, I can see why people are using it. So I would suggest experiment with it, especially if you've ever dealt with AWS, especially from an individual developer perspective. Getting JavaScript functions, serverless functions running up in the cloud was super easy compared to trying to get Lambda stuff running up there. I would, especially if you're curious too, because I think everybody's going to be talking about it, and having a good grounding in that as a developer is probably a good idea. And on the other hand, from a not probably in the corporate, but I've found it from a personal perspective, which is similar, is now Zeit has to be the most usable cloud deployment tooling way. My personal website I've been hosting on now Zeit for a year, and it's got to be the dead easiest, most straightforward way of deploying web apps to the cloud. So enterprise grade is Microsoft, and personal, probably enterprise grade too, is actually Zeit. So those are my two picks.
Awesome. But I've heard good things about Zeit. So cool stuff. If people want to follow you, Kitson, and see what you're working on these days, are you on Twitter or GitHub, or where do they go?
Yep, both Twitter, GitHub, Kitson K, K-I-T-S-O-N-K on both. Well, pretty much anywhere you can find me with that. So, I'll be attending TSConf in Seattle in March, the first TypeScript conference. We've got tickets are still on sale for that as well too. But it's the first focused TypeScript conference in the globe.
Cool. Yeah, gotta love the TypeScript. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and we will catch everyone next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.